Okay, I would like to welcome everybody to the pilot episode, the debut episode, if you will, of Native as I Can Be. My name is Gino Ray. This is my first shot at a podcast. I have recorded my voice many times, so I'm not too unfamiliar with this process. And I am like a lot of people, I don't love the sound of my voice once it's been recorded. But regardless of the sound of my voice, I do have a voice that has something to say, which I will be getting into as this series unfolds. So again, the name of this is Native as I Can Be, and this is an idea that I originally had in the form of a documentary where I walked from Klamath Falls, which is where my tribe, the Klamath Indians, are from, and I was going to walk across the United States from Klamath Falls to Pine Ridge Reservation to Oklahoma. I was going to go backwards down the Trail of Tears and end up at the Bureau of Indian Affairs building in Washington, D.C., and along the way, I was going to be stopping and talking to tribal elders and staying with families on reservations. And basically, I wanted to figure out what it meant and what it means to be Native in the United States. I've had this idea probably 20 years, and it's been started and stopped. It morphed into a television series, and I went as far as creating a Kickstarter and getting a hold of somebody at PBS to see about getting it made. Didn't have any luck. I then decided I would turn it into a book, and I got started writing, and I wrote about a chapter, and wasn't getting anywhere with that. I wasn't committing myself to putting everything down on paper, I guess you could say. And so I kind of forgot about it. And then just a couple days ago, I thought, why not do a podcast? That seems easy enough. You get something to record onto, and then you put it out there. So this is it. This is the episode. So, the debut episode. So what I'm going to try and do with this podcast is, like I said, I want to take a look at what it means to be Native American in America in 2019 and beyond, and where I fit into that equation. And the reason I call this Native as I Can Be is I am mixed. I'm Native and white. I grew up with my mom and sisters on the Oregon coast. My sisters and I have different dads, and they are white through and through, and my dad is Native, so I am mixed. I am more white than Native, but I look more Native than white. So I identify as Native. Where the title comes in as Native as I Can Be is not really knowing where I fit in, and I go back to being a kid and going to powwows and just, being around natives, these beautiful Native people with regalia and the music and the fry bread and the dancing, and just, my heart would just be full, man, of love and pride. But I didn't know how to act around my own people. I felt like I was on the outside looking in while I was right in the middle of it. And I was pretty sure everybody knew, or felt that I didn't belong and I wasn't one of these people, one of my people. And so it was a really weird, space to be in. Of course, then I go back to Reedsport which is a small town, and it's a nice town, but it's probably 97 or so, at least 90, I would say, percent white, and not really feeling like I entirely fit in there, in that community, and to a lesser extent in my own family, where on my mom's side, everybody is white. So going to powwows and outside of powwows and at home, trying to be native and trying to represent natives and show pride in being native, and not really knowing how to do that. And so getting a lot of my cues from Westerns, whatever form of media that had native representation, that's kind of where I took my cues from, and whatever tidbits I could pick up when I would see my dad on spring breaks and summer breaks, things like that. So that's kind of my backstory. And when we talk to my dad here in a little bit, he will give you his version of being native as he can be or could be. And his version is a lot more extreme than mine, because he went through some real shit. And I'll let him tell that story, but he went through a similar thing of being a native, trying to fit into a white world and trying to fit into a native world. And what I've discovered as over the years, as I've talked to people about this idea, is it's not just natives that feel like that. There are plenty of people that feel like they're on the outside looking in. And I've heard, people who were adopted, and people that have been in the closet for a long time, or transgender people, all kind of feeling like they don't quite fit in where they're at and where they want to be. Maybe they don't feel like they fit in there either. So while my experience will be mainly focused on the Native American part, I'm hoping that there's something in these episodes that everybody can relate to, and maybe I can express something, or my dad, or any of the people I have on the show will say something that gets you right in the feels and makes you interested in listening more. So that's kind of the premise, and I have a lot of ideas for episodes that I would like to touch on. I would like to speak about the mascot issue, and whether having names like Redskins and Braves and Indians is something we should be moving past, or if that's something we need to stand up and make those a thing of the past. I would like to talk about casinos and what those do or do not do for tribes, and what the perception is of what they do for the tribes that have them. And I can tell you a little bit about the Klamath Indians have a tribe. Have a casino, and I can give you a little insight about what that looks like for us as far as money and things like that. I want to talk about the missing and murdered indigenous women, which is a big issue. And I'll give you some stats on that as that episode comes. But Native women per capita are missing far more than most or all other races. And that's a very serious thing. And that's not going to be a funny one, obviously, but something I want to talk about. So I've got a lot of ideas in mind. I got a lot of people I want to talk to. And this is something, like I said, that's been on my mind for probably 20 years. And I've done enough sitting on it and ignoring it It's time to get this thing off the ground and make it make it as big and as good a project as I always pictured it being. So I am very glad you guys are listening and you are along for the ride. And I will do my best to deliver something entertaining and informative and all the things you would expect out of a good podcast. So, thank you for listening, and let's get into it right now. All right, here we go. So, we are about to talk to my dad. Those of you who know me personally should all be familiar with him. If you haven't met him, you should at least be familiar with the legend. His name is Eugene Ray. He went by Gino most of his life. And so unofficially, I am Gino Jr., but I never particularly liked that, the junior part of that. So he became Gino 1, I became Gino 2. And they also used to call me Little Gino, but that doesn't really fit me anymore either. So the reason I want to talk to him to kick off this series is his story is not all that different from a lot of Native stories, especially, where we're talking about the previous generation or even the previous couple generations. It's a sad story. I mean, his parents died young and he was taken, and, I will let him tell the story because I cannot tell it the way he can tell the story. It's just a good jump off spot, and we'll be hearing about his story, and then we'll discuss what it means to be an Apple Indian. And if you're unfamiliar with the term, an Apple Indian is someone who is red on the outside and white on the inside. And as far as insults that might get hurled amongst Native people, I think that's probably right up there at the top as far as the ones that, leave a mark. So we're going to discuss that because I can say pretty confidently that he and I have been accused of being or were or even are Apple Indians. So it's an interesting concept to explore. So we're going to be talking about that, and it should be pretty good. Pop's a pretty funny guy, and he's got a pretty interesting story, and I think you guys will like it. So without further ado, here's Pop. Okay, well, here we are getting ready to talk to Pop. He is calling from Klamath Falls, Oregon, appropriately enough, and we're going to get into some topics here. So, Pop, why don't you go ahead and, well, first of all, how excited are you to be on the very first episode of Native as I Can Be?
I think it's great. I love it. I know you talked about a book and doing that, and I was going to be kind of part of that. Yeah, so I think it's great. I love it. So.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited. So why don't you tell us when you were born, where you were born, and kind of what led you, how did you end up in Estacada, Oregon? I know that's a lot to cover, but just to kind of give a little.
Well, I can do that. I was born in 1942, January 15th, 1942. And I think there's a place down there called Fort Klamath, and they had an Indian agency there, and I think they had a hospital there. I'm not sure. And I think that's where I was actually born, was at that agency, because there was a lot of other Indian people at the time that they said they was born at the agency, because I don't think they had a hospital right here. I mean, they might have had a hospital, but I think that's where I was born, was at that agency there in, well, I call it Chilliquin. So, I'm not familiar with the whole story, but then about that same time, this program, the government did this program, they called it assimilation. They want to assimilate these people into society, because, you know, there's a lot of stuff going on, a lot of drinking and a lot of, you know, shooting going on, and things were just quite right going on the reservation at the time. So they was able to, you know, just go through and just take kids, just take them and say, well, we're going to put them in a, you know, we're going to put them in a better home, and you know, so that they'll, you know, they'll have a chance at life and live a better life and get an education and all that. And that's how, well, my brother Bill and I, that's how we wound up in Estacada, Oregon, because that's where they had sent us.
And this was some sort of government agency of some sort?
Yeah. Government agency. I don't know. I think there was a name of, well, I can't remember what it was. You know, I thought I had a paper here. But anyhow, that's how we wound up in Estacada. That's where they sent us. You know, and then there was another fellow that I know that he that's where he wound up, and there were several other people, you know, so there was probably about, I don't know, maybe 10 of us, 10, you know, group that went up there at that time, and that's where I grew up through the that whole time, to the, you know, that's where I spent most of my life, you know, the first, well, probably 30 years of my life. That's where I was at, you know. So.
And then, what was your mom and dad's name, and where were they at when this was happening?
Well, that's another thing I'm not really sure of, because I was so young when we left. You know, because I think Bill was, I think, a year old, so I was probably about 2 years old, and of course, my mom would have had to been in the Chilliquin area at the time. I think that my dad, he was in I think it was World War II was going on, so he was in the Army at the time, so I don't know if he was actually there when I was born or what went on. And then my mom, Pearl, well, I think she had got into some kind of trouble and wound up doing some jail time, so that we were actually, you know, in care of my dad. He was just not, he wasn't able at the time to take care of us, and I think that's why, you know, we were taken at the time, you know, so.
And then you have some other brothers and sisters too.
Yeah, of course, Bill was my full brother, Bill, and then I had a sister, Jamie, we call it, she went by the name Jamie Jackson, and then I also she was a half-sister, then I had another half-sister, Eileen, she was born later on, and I think in the 50s, somewhere around there. So, and so that was my immediate, my immediate family there. So yeah, but my dad, his name was Eugene Ray too. So I was Eugene Ray Jr. So, and Bill was Bill Ray. So.
And Pearl and Banjo were not very old when they passed, right?
Well, no, not really, no, because, Pearl, she passed away in 1956. She was in a car wreck on New Year's Eve. I think it was 1956. And then my dad, Banjo, that was his nickname was Banjo. He passed away in 1967, and he died of sclerosis of the liver. But that's when he passed away. So, and then during that time, I never really knew Pearl, or even I have no recollection of ever seeing her. Of course, I remember my dad Banjo because even though we were adopted, not adopted, but fostered in a foster home in Estacada, my dad was still able to come and visit us during the summertime. And this was even before we went to school, and back in the early 40s, he would come and visit us, take Bill and I, and we just travel with him. That's why I remember some of the stuff that he would go back down to Chiloquin, and that's how I remember as a kid being in Chiloquin, because I asked Jamie one time, I said, where was the fire? There was a big fire that was down there. There was a box factory there in Chiloquin. And I asked her about it, and she said, well, how do you know that? I said, well, I'm a young kid, 5 years old, and, that was 1947. I actually looked it up on the internet. There was a big fire in Chiloquin that year, and so I just remember things like that, as a kid, and then that after that, that's when we come back to Estacada, and that's when I started my school years. Started grade school in Estacada, Oregon. Oh.
Well, I don't know if you know this or remember this, but was there any talk of maybe going back to live with Banjo, or did he ever try to kind of get you guys back, or was once you guys were out, that was it? You guys were out, or do you know?
Well, no, I as near as I remember, was that he was not able to take care of us, and just from stories that I've heard about Pearl, she had, was doing some jail time, so she wasn't even around, and that's why we got locked into this simulation, and I don't think that I know that we was there in Estacada, and that's just the way it was,
So you were in how old were you when Banjo passed away?
Oh, I was 25. So, but I had not seen him for. Well, I remember him coming and visit Bill and I, and then one day, he just didn't show up, and so I just kind of accepted it as well. That's the way it is. And, and it wasn't till, I don't know, years, maybe 10, 15 years, I was in a bar in Portland, Oregon, and I was sitting there, and this lady asked me, she says, "What's your name?" I said, "My name is Gene." He says, "Gene Ray?" I said, "Well, yeah, how did you know?" She said, "Well," she says, "Well, because I know your dad." And she says, you just fit an image of him. And she said, I just talked to him today. And she said, "Would you like to talk to him?" I said, "Well, yeah, okay." So I talked to him, and he was living in Toppenish at the time, and we just made arrangements to go and see him, and visit with him, and then I think Bill was in the Army at that time, because when Banjo passed away, well, they brought Bill home, for his service, well, and then like I say, then Pearl, she was passed away in 1956. I was just a kid. I was probably 12, 13, 14 maybe, so.
So then you're in Estacada, you're growing up, spending your time in Estacada, and what was the name of the family you lived with there?
Well, it was Deuce family, Ernest and Bill Deuce, and yeah, we was there for that. Well, from that time until I turned 18, but I was still a part of that family, right up till Mr. Deuce passed away, then Mrs. Deuce passed away, and then it was just then Bill, and he kind of watched over the farm during that time, because I was off working and doing other stuff at the time. So, but it was always been a part of that family, and then they even left Bill and I some property, of that farm, because it was a 100-acre farm. They left some property that, later. Well, he was even on a part of that, because Les was in on that too, because what the property that was left to Les and I as a deal.
Yeah. So were there other foster kids there in the house, or was it just you and Bill?
Oh, well, yeah, there was. As I can remember, there was. Well, that's what Mrs. Deuce did. She took in foster kids, through the Clackamas County. That's what she did. That was the way she made her livelihood. And Mr. Deuce, he was a well driller. That's what he did. And Mrs. Deuce, she did the take care of foster kids, because some kids that need a place to stay, they'd call there. Well, yeah, they come and stay maybe for 6 months. One other girl came, I think, stayed maybe a year, and she had been doing this all her life, and just growing up there would just, the kids that would come back, and she had taken care of her. They just, to see her, and, just say hello, and let know that they was doing okay, because of them, them taking care of them at the time, so. So there was, during that time, I seen a lot of kids go through there,
So Estacada is not a very big town. What do you think? 2,000 people, maybe, or less? So less.
Well, I think it's. I kind of even remember it being 1,200 maybe at the
1,200.
very beginning.
How many Indian kids do you think were in your school or in your grade at the time?
In my grade, I don't think there was. There was. There was. I can think there was one other guy that was in Bill's class, and there was another guy that he was younger, but he didn't come on until later. And then it must have been 5 or 6, and then Tish, she was another one of the foster kids, and then I remember when Jamie was there, was at the very beginning, but then she, for some reason, got back to Klamath Falls, so she wasn't there that long. But I remember her being there when she lived there at one time, So.
Well, the reason I ask, because the name of this is Native as I Can Be, and one of the themes is going to be, being a native in a mostly white world and trying to represent your culture and your people. But if you haven't necessarily grown up around your culture and your people, how do you properly represent your culture and your people? So what was that like for you back then, knowing you're native and come from Chiloquin, which is a native community reservation? Did you try to represent being Indian, or were you trying to be white, or how did you handle that?
Well, no, I always remember being native, and the fact that I was native Indian, living in an all white community, they always, they didn't let you forget that. I mean, in school, I just always remember, being the oddball, the one that was different, because my skin was different color, and and I always remember myself as like sticking out like a sore thumb, and then if something happened, well, I was always the one that got, well, he did it,
Yeah.
Gene did it. I seen him, he did it, and then when he got 25, 30 kids in a classroom, and, they're all saying, well, he did it, and I saw him do it, I was just totally outnumbered, I never had much of a chance,
Yeah.
There was no way to talk myself out of it,
Yeah.
So after a while, I just kind of learned to accept that,
But were you still rocking that, I don't know, persona, or were you still like, yeah, well, I'm Indian and I'm damn proud of it? Or was it more, I'm just going to kind of keep quiet about this? And
well, yeah, yeah. I had a tendency to rock the boat anyway, so I didn't try to personify that any, because I'd already been tagged, so I didn't need to, to carry on any more than what I was already doing. Yeah, later on in life, yeah, after I grew up a little bit, then I decided, well, I'm Indian, and that's what I'm going to be. That's, so, but, it's caused more trouble, but I was used to it by then.
So let's talk about that, dude. When you decided I'm Indian, that's what I'm gonna be. What was there a learning curve there?
Well, no, because I I got it started. I kind of started out at an early age, as far as as uh, drinking. I started drinking beer as a kid. Like all the rest of all the rest of the kids drinking beer. You go to a party and the kids would be drinking beer. He was 14, 15 years old. That's what you did. You get a 6-pack of beer and go have fun. And so that's how I just dealt with it at the time. I just stayed kind of in a drinking mode there for a while.
I'm getting rained on. I'm coming inside.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so and then that's why I never made it to high school, because I would just that's being in high school was not what I wanted. I wasn't going anywhere, wasn't doing anything, and so just decided to go on with my life.
So did you eventually make it down to Klamath Falls to live?
No, not really. No, I didn't. I worked in and around Estacada, because I worked in a logging, worked as a logger there in Estacada. So, and then that was, Friday nights, or, Friday night at the bar and all weekend, and back to work on Monday morning, and, with the hangover. But I managed to get through all that, and then, to the late 60s and to the 70s, just working and it wasn't until in the 70s I got a suspension on my driver's license, and for a DUI, and then so they put me on a you're going to have to not to quit drinking, but to go to a program. So the program at the time was in Portland, and they called it NARA, which is Native American Rehabilitation was for Native Americans. That's what it was, Native American Rehabilitation. And it was for Indians, from all parts of the country come there, to sober up and clean up their act and all that. And that's how I got into going to Indian AA meetings. And there was a group that, in fact, they had an in-house living place. They called it Totem Lodge, and that's where I would go to these Indian AA meetings, and they had them every evening. They would have them, and I was living in Portland then, and working, and so I would go to these meetings, and then every once in a while, then they'd have a sweat lodge. So I go to the sweat lodge, and that's how I actually got involved right in the Native American community by doing that. So then let's see, yeah.
So was there any
And
ever?
then, yeah, go ahead.
Was there ever, as you were getting more involved and going to these meetings, was there ever a feeling like, and I'm asking this because of personal experiences, I think, getting more involved in the Indian community, did you ever kind of feel like I don't really belong? I don't don't belong, but maybe I'm putting on a front to belong. I mean, or was it like these are my people, they're going to accept me, and
Mm-hmm. Well, that's what they did. Yeah, that's what they actually did. They actually uh, uh, accepted me, and I was because they didn't really know anything about my past life, and I felt like well, maybe I'm finally home. Maybe I found a place where I can just be who I am. That's the way I felt there, because everything was associated around the spiritualism, with the AA and all that stuff was it was native. They just had the native drum there to be native singing, and then that's all I got in going into powwows and stuff, and then I knew other people, and then I actually, went to they had sun dances over in Eastern Oregon that I'd go to, so yeah, I felt like, I'm at home, and this is where, this is where I belong, I finally reached my goal,
Yeah, that's beautiful. I think my own feelings about that, of maybe being an outsider or something like that, is really kind of just being self-conscious. I kind of think I made that story up myself, because I can't look back to being around anybody that, at a powwow or wherever, or your friends that I met, ever making me feel like I shouldn't be there. It's just, that was kind of in my own head, I think, and I think that's why I asked that question.
But the only place I felt like an outsider was being in a white, living in a white community. That I mean, I had friends, and they knew I was Indian, and so I mean, I had friends that I worked with, every day, and in the log, and I worked with every day, and I worked construction. I worked in the labor union, and for 5 years, and there were just a lot of white people that was around, and that was just I didn't feel like an outsider then, but I mean that stigma was still there, though. That because I get to blanket ass or hey, wagon burner, and a lot of people, hey, chief, how you doing,
Yeah.
But I just learned to accept that as,
Well, it brings me to this name, or this term that maybe not everybody's familiar with, but most Native people should be familiar with, and it's the term Apple Indian. Can you explain what that is? What that means?
What Apple Indian means that you're red on the outside and white on the inside. But I had never heard that term for till later on in life. So it wasn't after I had started doing this NARA stuff and being around Indians more than I had been before, So I thought I was on the right track with what I was doing by doing these AA and going to the sun dances and doing the sweat lodge and doing the powwow stuff. So I thought that, well, I'm, well, no, I'm not an Apple Indian because, that's not the way I was living. I wasn't living that way at that time, so, later on I thought, well, wait a minute. What about that, the first 30 years of my life? I was living as a white,
Yeah.
So, so I never considered myself that until, like I said, I had to rethink it, and like I said, living that first 30 years, being, living in a white community, well, I don't know if that's being Apple or not, because I never considered myself, white, because I knew I was Indian. I knew I was Indian all along. So,
well, and I think as far as, at least the first 18 years, I mean, that's kind of where you were placed, was in that community.
Yeah.
That's part of the assimilation thing you were talking about.
Yeah, I was there, and there was no way. I was thinking, well, there was no way out, no way escaping it, and I tried, just tried to live the best way I thought I could, during that time, But what I lived out there in Estacade, I had an escape, by being able to, it was tough going to school because, because I was the one that stuck out the most. But I always had the farm that I could go to at the end of the day, and that was my escape, was the farm. Going home and doing chores and taking care of the animals, and just things were different there. So, even though I was, living in a white, living with a white family, I wasn't treated the same way that I was being treated in the schools, school system.
Yeah. I think an Apple Indian, at least the, kind of the way I see, is someone who's going to be Indian when it's convenient or when it looks good on them, but they wouldn't necessarily want or be able to handle the things that come along with being a full-time Indian. And I think it's something inside a person that really makes them Indian. Because if you look at your nephew, my cousin Garrick, does not look like an Indian. Red hair, white as can be, but I think represents natives very, very well. I mean, I think he really cares about native people. He was on tribal council. I mean,
well, he's Klamath, yeah. So and he's got the Klamath blood. So, I never actually really talked to him about it. What I've talked to him about what he experienced. Growing up. Because he actually lived down here for a while, and put up with some of the stuff that Indian people were going through living in an Indian community. So
I want to have him on an episode. I think he'd be a good person to talk to.
He would. I'm sure he would do it too. Because he has pretty good perspective on all of that stuff, and he out of all that, he got a good education out of it too. So he's a learning man on that stuff.
Sure. I think it would be because I want to have a casino episode, and kind of talk about tribal gaming, and he might have been sort of on the the fringes of that when they were building the casino down there.
Yeah, because it hadn't actually taken place. It was on. It was always on. Well, we're going to get this done, but let's take care of some of this other stuff first to get this done. So I wasn't familiar with tribal council stuff, but I'm glad I never was part of it.
Well, I want to kind of wrap this up. What do you think? I don't know. This is a broad question, but what do you think it means, or what does the future hold for Native people in 2019 and beyond? I mean, what does it mean to you to be Native?
Well, still there's a lot of the drinking going on. From what I see is I see these Native youth making a lot of progress. They're getting the chances, for an education, and there's more, maybe money available for them to do that, and that's what they're doing, That's what I see. I see it in the climate newsletter that all these kids that they're getting an education, and they're getting this degree, and they're graduating high school, and they're graduating grade school, and then they're all making going to be successful someday for what they're doing now, and I think that I don't know if I deprived myself of that when I was growing up, or if that's one of the questions I deal with myself. Well, what if I never went through this? What if I just was able to stay there on the Klamath reservation and live my life out down there, and I just wonder what that'd be like, So when I think about that, I think, well, maybe I probably would have been better off with what happened. I don't know.
Yeah.
I can't predict the future, and I couldn't predict that future, but I'm still alive, so that's all I can say. Well, I've made it this far, so I must have done something right,
Well, I think another thing we can talk about on another day is the history of the Klamath tribe, and there was a lot of things going on, especially in the 70s, involving water rights, land rights, and kind of backdoor deals, and that didn't necessarily do the Klamath people any favors at all. And in fact, it almost decimated them.
Yeah.
And
well,
I thought about that too when I was thinking about, well, what if you had never, what if you had stayed down there? Like, you could have ended up a statistic,
Yeah.
But so it's hard to say.
That's what I think, and then when the Klamath, one of the things that you did was, when they sold the land, the Klamath didn't sell the land, but that was another thing. It was just taken from them. I can't think of the term right now what they called it at the time, but and then the money that they give out, that was just a big joke. That didn't do anybody any good. So.
Yeah, I think that'll be an eye opener, because I don't think that's something you're not going to see taught in school, really.
Well, yeah, it was termination.
Oh yeah, termination, right?
Termination, yeah. That took its toll.
Well, that'll be coming up coming up. Stay tuned for that one. Pop, thank you so much for talking to me tonight, being a part of the first ever episode.
Well, good. Well, I'm glad to be part of it. I remember they asked me, this restoration powwow was this weekend, and then I stayed down here with Gary. A few years back, I was staying down here with Gary, and one of the ladies from the tribe down there said, "Well, Uncle Gene, will you carry the tribal flag for us in the parade on, during the restoration later on?" I said, "Well, I'd be happy to." And that made me feel proud.
Yeah.
That I was able to do that. So,
yeah, that's a big honor. Did you get any pictures?
I got pictures of it, yeah. Yeah, so, well, that's that was my contribution, so I was glad I got to do it.
Yeah, that's big. Well, thank you for talking to me, and thank everybody for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Okay, son, you take care.
All right.
Love you, man.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay, that's episode 1, Native as I Can Be. My name is Gino Ray. I don't know if you're supposed to like and subscribe and do all that stuff. I don't really care if you do or not. I want you to listen to it. I would like feedback and constructive feedback, or you can trash it. I don't care. But here you go. The pilot is done. I hope you liked it. Stay tuned for the next episode.